Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with educator, hoops coach, and podcast host Tony Rambles. His story started in Detroit, Michigan. It was taken to Connecticut, and because of divorced parents, he went to Houston, Texas, because of the oil and gas industry. From Houston, he went on to China with his wife of almost 10 years to teach English to Chinese toddlers. And now he's back in Houston teaching public speaking to high school students, along with running his own podcast. We get into his essence and a little bit more. Enjoy this interview.
Right on. So how was work today?
Oh, man. It's always good, pretty much, for the most part. I'm a school teacher. I got one class period that just every day is something. But after that and before that, it's all gravy.
I work in my day job. I'm an IT guy in a school district, and my wife is a fifth grade teacher, so I'm knee-deep in that world all the time.
Yep. So, I'm pretty sure she comes home with stories like, oh, man, this class killing me.
well, and I see it, too. I'm kind of like the janitor in Breakfast Club. Like, I see everything. Like, I go in and out. I'm dipping into rooms. I'm dipping out, and I see bits and pieces of everything. So, but yeah, Tony, thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate it. You got quite a story, so I appreciate you taking a minute out.
Of course. This is what we do, right?
Yeah.
We talk and we jump on other people's stuff and talk, and so I'm glad to do it.
Cool. Yeah, so before we get into it, I want to know how you did during COVID. Like, how did you do during COVID, and how did you change over that time?
COVID was, I think it was just a trying time for everybody, just in different ways. And I think depending on your personality, you dealt with it differently. So for me, I am a people person. I like to be around people. I like to hang out. I like to talk, right? Hence why I have a podcast. And during COVID, you couldn't be with people face to face. So that was very difficult for me to not be able to go back to school, because it happened as we were on spring break. And so we go on spring break, it's about a week, and then COVID really starts to become real for us in America. Because I think before then it was like, what is this thing? Something's going on. But we just never went back. It was like we had a week, and then there was another week, and then they would put out videos and say, all right, we're dealing with it, we're monitoring it. And then eventually it was just like, we're not going back to school. So for me to not be able to be next to the people that I work with, to not be able to see my kids, to not really know how people were doing, that was a struggle for me, to just be isolated. Couldn't go to church, for a little bit. So just not having people around, that was definitely hard. And so one thing I did to help myself was I found a basketball court, and so I would just go there and I would shoot, and I would listen to music, and that was my way of just being able to cope, just being able to get out the house, doing something I love, which is to hoop. So that's one of the things that helped me through COVID. And of course, all the video calls and all the talking to people on the phone and through Zoom and Teams, it helped, but it's no substitute for face-to-face, in-person conversations and connection.
So you have quite a story. Everything began for you in Detroit, Michigan, went to Connecticut, China, back to Houston. So I guess talk to me a little bit about how your life began back in Detroit. Like, what was your childhood like to give you this desire to, not only be a teacher, but to podcast and talk and to be curious about
growing up, my parents were divorced when I was, I want to say maybe like three or four, something like that. Because it's really hard for me to remember all of that when I was that young. I remember where we lived at Eastern Michigan University, at least for a little bit. And so we were always back and forth. When I say we, I mean my brother, who's a year older than I am, and my sister, who's 2 years younger. So we're all relatively close in age, and our experience is different. So as we all grew up with our parents kind of pulling us from one place to another, we're all from Detroit, Michigan, so we lived on a couple of different sides, mostly the west side, but we moved around a lot. And my dad's side of the family ended up in Connecticut. I'm sure it was for work. I don't think I ever really asked why. But the good guess is there were jobs up there, and so they went. So we ended up a few times, and I want to say maybe twice, we lived in Connecticut for maybe a school year or less. It was never for that long of a time. And we would come back to Detroit and live with my mom. And my dad would kind of be in and out, especially in those younger years, all the way up till about middle school, where my dad was back. And I think from there he got to be a little bit more consistent. And then he moved to Texas. Moved to Houston, Texas, where I currently live. And from there, my dad wanted to be more stable. He had remarried my stepmom, and they lived here for oil and gas. So at that point, they wanted to bring all their kids down to Houston for a better life, right? So we moved to Houston, and still we were back and forth. The same three of us were back and forth. So I came down here in 7th grade, went back, and I eventually landed back in Houston, sophomore year of high school for good. And from there, you make it through high school, you kind of figure it out. And it was still tough. I think the thing that prepared me to do was to find out how to get comfortable in changing situations, because everything was always different. I was always the new kid in school, and I had to figure it out quickly, right? You have to adapt. And so fast forward a couple years, I graduate high school, I meet my wife, and eventually we get married. And by this time I'm 24. And so funny thing is, we move every year because we're always trying to get the better apartment, right? At this point, we don't have a home. We're struggling college students. Try to find a better place to live. Rent always goes up. At least you want to live somewhere that's decent. Once I graduated college in 2015, I then start to expand my search as far as what I want to do. So I'm working at the bank at this time, and now I go, you know what? I got a degree now. Let's see if I can make something else shake. So I go to a job fair, and there's a lady there. She's talking about teaching English in China. And in my mind, I'm like, nobody's going to China. That's crazy. No way, no how. Let me try to keep looking around and see what else is here. So you know how job fairs are. You walk around for about an hour, and you talk to 40 different people, and you go, I don't know if any of this is anything that I'm interested in. So I get back to my car. I got all these brochures. I got a bag full of stuff that I don't want to do. And I go, well, what about this China thing? So I start to do my research. And I go, well, this is how I pitch it to my wife. If we can travel and make money, then I think we're able to do both, because we don't have any money. We're still struggling college kids. So she goes, all right, to my surprise. And so less than a year later, I went to the job fair. It was about February. By August, we were gone. In Suzhou, China, 13 hours time difference. And we stayed there for a year. Things are amazing. You always look back on things like that with fond memories. You never remember the tough times, but there were some. But I met so many great people. We had a great experience. And I think if you move around like that and you live in different parts of the country, you live in different parts of the world, you just have a different experience, and your perspective is broader because you see things just a little differently from the standpoint of, like, everything is not just about America, right? There are other people out there with other thoughts and ideologies and different ways of life. So, Yeah, my divorced parents eventually got me so comfortable that I left the country.
Over all of this time, who has been a role model or a hero for you?
A role model. I want to say when we got back. No, before we got back. We're going to rewind a few years, and I am 22, 23 years old, and I'm going to church, Inspiration Church here in Houston, Texas, and a good friend of mine there, we call him Pops or Papa J, but his name is Carlos Jones Sr., and he and Mama J, or Stephanie Jones, they were the model of what marriage looks like for me as friends. And they are much older. They've been married for, decades. But to see that model, because I didn't see it growing up, I didn't necessarily know what marriage was supposed to look like. And so to have these people here to take us in, to feed us a lot of times, because, you have Bible studies there at people's houses, and we used to hang out on Sundays, to see what their marriage looked like up close at this point for another decade, it was great to hear their stories and to hear about their struggles, and for them just to be a model of consistency, not just for me, but for my wife as well. So I would say that they have been great role models, not just for me, but for us.
So if you could meet one person alive on the planet, who would it be? Who would you want to talk to?
One person alive. I would want to meet. Do I just have to choose one? I got two in mind.
Do it. Two's fine, man.
Okay, so one of my favorite artists is Eminem. So he's from Detroit. Actually grew up in Detroit, but wasn't born there. But this guy, I feel like, is one of the best people at their craft ever. I feel like the way that he does what he does, it takes a level of skill that many people can't get to and do it as well as he does. But he's also experienced a lot of trauma and loss and tragedy and so many setbacks in his life. I would love to talk to him about, I know it's well documented about who he is, but just to hear it from him, how you deal with these things and what goes on in your head. At one point, he tried to commit suicide, and so just to kind of see him on the other side, see him still around and still doing it, I would love to talk to him and hear about his experiences. And my second person would be Barack Obama, right? First black president, and I really feel like he did it his way. He didn't, I feel like he didn't really go on like smear campaigns. Like this guy was a stand-up guy. He was a role model. If I had to say that there was anybody that was a distant role model, it was him for me indirectly to go, wow, like a black man as the president. And he's cool. Like he's somebody that you can look up to and you go, man, this dude he's a cool guy and he's trying to do things the right way. At least that's what we all hope, right? I'm not going to get all into politics, but from the outside looking in, you really feel like he was trying to do his best and that he tried to hold his integrity. And he just felt like one of us. One of us as in, one of the guys at the cookout, right? He could be my uncle, right? That's what he felt like. So he was definitely a role model and somebody I would love to talk to.
Yeah, me too, for sure. I agree. So if you have a dream tonight, you run into the younger version of yourself, and you could give your younger version a piece of advice, say in your 20s, that version of you, based on all of the years of experience and wisdom you've gained, what would you tell your younger version?
I don't really have many regrets in life, but I do have one. And I went to University of Houston to play football. That was the only reason I went there. Now, I ended up meeting my wife there. I ended up coaching women's basketball at the intramural, at the rec center. So I got a couple of starts in things that have kind of pushed me through life. But one thing I gave up on in college is I didn't play football. So in high school, Coach Garner was the running backs coach at Hightower. He was like, you know what, you're talented enough to play football at the University of Houston. And I was like, man, that's big. that's the only reason I went there. But I had transcripts from 3 different high schools. I couldn't figure out how to bring that together, so I just gave up, and I just never played football. That was it. I have a sad high school football story, and I never played in college. So that's one of the few regrets that I have in life, is that I never played football at U of H, even though I felt like I was good enough to do so. I just gave up because of processes and administrative stuff. I never reached out for help. So that's what I would tell my younger self. Go play football, figure it out. And I think things may have been different. Things may have turned out the same, but I would have loved to have had that experience.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your students, everyone around you. But ultimately, you live your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a teacher. I think in all aspects of life, I end up being someone who wants to teach other people. So that's the role that I end up in. Funny story is there was an email sent out. This just happened yesterday. There was an email sent out saying, hey, I'm reaching out to you all. It was about 7 teachers, I think. And an administrator reached out and said, hey, you guys do a great job with kids. We want to hear some tactics, right? We want to hear some of your best practices. And so for me, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And anybody who's a teacher out there, I'm pretty sure they've heard this before. And they will normally respond, I do not want that work. I do not want to do any extra. I have enough stuff on my plate. And I felt the same way. But I started to get some ideas on how to be able to do that. So I reached back out, I hit the reply all button. So I know everybody sees the emails. And I just kind of start to set up a plan. And so eventually I see this administrator walking around, and they're like, oh, great job with that. Kind of get everybody together, and whoever emails back, great. If not, don't worry about it. You can go ahead and set it up. So again, I just fall into this responsibility just by being who I am. I'm a teacher. I'm a person who likes to help people and see people get better. One more thing, I have a kid at school. He's like, Mr. Franklin, I'm better than you. I'm going to be better than you. I said, I hope so. I hope I'm training you to be better than me. You should surpass me. Then he says, I'm better than you right now. I said, I think you're lying to yourself.
Well, Tony, if anybody wants to learn more about you and your podcast and anything about you, where can they go?
Yeah, they can find the Living Numbers podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. I am most likely there. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, on Fanbase. I'm everywhere. So just the Living Numbers podcast with Tony Rambles, and you should be able to find me. I'll try to stay active on social media, and talk to me. I'll talk back.
Right on. Tony, it's been a joy, man. Thank you for taking time out. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.